Hello and welcome. If you're joining us from livescienceandspace.com, this is our very special episode about Westworld and the science of AI. I'm joined with some very special guests today. I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Peter Asaro. He's a philosopher of science, technology, and media, and his work examines artificial intelligence and robotics as a form of digital media. He's an assistant professor in the School of Media Studies at the New School here in New York. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And we have Dr. Liao here. He is the director of the Center for Bioethics at New York University, also here in New York. And he was formerly the deputy director and a senior research fellow in the program on the ethics of the new bioscience at Oxford University. And you've written a number of books and articles about philosophy and technology and the convergence of both. So we're very happy to have you.
Yeah.
And if you've been tuning in, you should know this fella,
Hello.
Tariq Malik, the managing editor of space.com. So let's first, I want to say
Robot fan, Tariq Malik.
Robot fan,
right.
and also, a little scared of it.
A bit
Is
of
that
that
fair
too.
to say? Okay.
I walk a fine line.
That's why I brought him in here, because I feel like this is good therapy for Tariq.
To get comfortable.
Yeah.
With the 21st century.
I'm like, let's share all our feelings here. So let me start off by saying, if you have not been keeping up with the show, there are going to be spoilers. We're going to talk about some of the up-to-date storyline and plot points. So if you don't want to hear spoilers, I would recommend coming back to this and watching it after you've caught up. So anyway, let me give you a little bit of a rundown of what we're talking about here. This is the HBO sci-fi drama Westworld. It's fantastic. If you haven't started watching it, I highly recommend it. But it looks at artificial intelligence, and it explores some of the moral issues that surround it. So Westworld is this futuristic theme park that's, frontier themed, and humans can go and visit and sort of have their way with the world, really. It's kind of a bizarre alternate universe for them. So it was based on a film from 1973 by Michael Crichton, and when I reached out to you, you said you teach it in your course. So do you want to explain a little bit about how that works in with your academic studies here?
Yeah, well, I do a course on robots as media, so thinking about how robots act as a new media technology, a form of communication, and we interact with them or interact with people through robots, if you have a telepresence robot and things like that. But there's a lot of interesting themes that have come out of cinema around science fiction and robots for the whole century. I mean, Metropolis, and Forbidden Planet, and Blade Runner, and Westworld, Stepford Wives. So we watch a lot of these films, and they have a lot of similar themes about destruction and violence, but also love and romance.
Right, which we're starting to see. It was the 5th episode on Sunday, so we're right in the middle of the season, and we're starting to get a sense that things are not looking so great for the humans in this show. I went and watched the original movie over the weekend. I hadn't seen it before. And one of the biggest changes that I found is that they really shifted, I guess, the focus of our sympathies. So the movie, you sympathize more with the humans who are visiting and the destruction that sort of happens in that sphere. Whereas the show is sort of pushing us to really feel more sympathy for the hosts. Is that, do you think, something that's a product of the difference between where we were in AI technology, say in 1973 versus now? Or is this maybe just a different focus that the filmmakers are looking at?
Well, it's definitely a different focus for the film, and I think how they've developed that both cinematographically and narratively is interesting. So in terms of the cinematography, the old film is very clear that when you sort of pop open the robot, it's circuits inside.
Right.
And one thing I've noticed through the first 5 episodes is I haven't seen any real circuits. Occasionally there's a little sort of synthetic thing, but it's a lot of blood and guts. And when they show even the assembly room, it looks more like a morgue than it does like a robot sort of facility.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So Dr. Liao, I was thinking that too as well, because when they fix up these robots, it's like surgery. It's not like, the Yul Brynner when his face pops off. It's so different from that. And what does that really say for where we're going for AI? Should they look markedly different from humans, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think they're trying to get us to empathize with the hosts right now, and so there's this sort of you might think of it in this way. So the way I like to think about it is that there's sort of a theory of moral status where you sort of in the past you just distinguish sort of between persons and things, right? And so the way the story is running is kind of treating all these robots as things, right?
Yep.
And but actually, you might think that moral status come in degrees, and so now we're seeing that we're seeing that some of these robots can actually feel, maybe it looks like they can sort of have feelings, right?
Yeah.
They're being hurt, et cetera, and so and that's trying to get the I think the viewer to empathize with that, sort of get into that perspective,
Right.
and which I think is really fascinating. So.
So I had a question. Just I think it might pertain directly to this. Is when I watched the original Westworld, it was like, oh my gosh, robots and going amok. There's this intrepid reporter, and it was very adventurous. And watching this new show, I don't know if it's because I've grown or I work with technology a lot more now, but when I think of AI, I think of two different things. There is robots, right? There are robots that need some kind of programming to run, but then AI is like a separate formless type of concept that wouldn't really need a robot to do anything, and I haven't seen that yet, and I'm wondering if that's going to come out in the show itself. But is that a disconnect that we still have as a society, or are there schools of thought that says you can have AI without a robot, or that any machine that has it, be it a computer, a desktop, a refrigerator, is then a robot?
I think it's an interesting question, and the idea of a disembodied AI, and I think it's really about embodiment is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so if you have a disembodied AI, okay, it can sort of win chess games, but it still has to have somebody move the chess pieces for it in some sense. And whether that has consciousness, I think is a difficult question, because so much of what we mean by consciousness is about our embodied experience, proprioception, feeling, pain. And I think that's why they go to so much lengths to sort of show the visceral, embodied experience of these robotics hosts in the show, because that lets us empathize much more powerfully with them, versus the kind of black box, right? If you're talking about HAL and, say, 2001, where it's just this glowing red eye, and it's very easy to see that as this sort of impersonal, evil kind of being, even though he sort of has an embodiment that gets turned off in the end.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, consciousness is something that I wanted to get into, and it's such a big topic that I'm sure we'll unpack it as we go along. But how do we really define it? And is there a difference between how we define consciousness as, like, from a philosophy point of view versus a scientific point of view? Are they different, or?
That's a great question. So that's sort of the million-dollar question, is sort of whether these robots are conscious at all. And there's also the further question whether they're sort of meta-conscious, whether they're sort of self-aware. So it's just sort of generally being aware of the environment versus being sort of aware of what they're doing. And you're starting to see some of that in sort of, say, the 5th episode, where Dolores is starting to talk to herself, and she's starting to say, she's starting to have desires. Those are sort of, she doesn't just want to be the damsel. She wants to sort of get in and sort of do something more, right? And so that starts to look like she's got some sort of reflection, which could be marks of consciousness. And we don't really know how the story's going to go, but it's really interesting. But there's definitely big debates about whether these robots are conscious. That's definitely sort of one criteria. But you might think that, I mean, in terms of the moral status, what I really like about the show is that even if the robots aren't conscious, they may have all sorts of other like attributes, like they can feel pain and, et cetera, which, there are issues about whether you need consciousness in order to be able to feel pain. So some people might think that, look, mice might not have consciousness, but they could feel pain, or, in terms of this meta-awareness, et cetera. And so what's really interesting is that the guests are treating the hosts as if they were just sort of things. This is what I was talking about earlier, which is sort of, it's based on this 18th century theory of moral status, where there's only persons and things, right? And so they're treating them as mere means, like sort of just like the way I would treat the garbage can, or the way I would treat maybe a self, like a DIY robot that I built at home right now, which I think doesn't have consciousness. Also, philosophers debate about that. Although philosophers debate about that, right? But the thing is that these things are becoming like much more complex and sophisticated, that you're starting to wonder, And what's really nice about the show is that it's pushing that. It's making you rethink what it is. And so it's not trying to answer the questions, but it's pushing the sort of, it's forcing you to think about what it is.
It's definitely very provocative. And actually the whole idea of treating the hosts as things, that's also the Westworld employees do that too. Like some of them, because was it Ford who like drew the knife across? Yeah.
That's right.
Just to show that, oh, this is not a person. You know, don't treat them, like don't cover them up if they're naked because they're not people.
Yeah.
So.
And that's a really interesting scene, because if someone's anesthetized, you can also cut them up and then they won't feel anything, right? So the mere fact that they'll bleed and not respond to it doesn't mean that they couldn't have consciousness. And so that's actually not that good of a test for consciousness, right? Like when they're sleeping. The test for consciousness is sort of, you know, when they're awake, and then when they, you know, like when you can talk to them, etc., whether they understand what you're talking about, etc., etc. So you might think that Ford has a mistaken theory of moral status and mistaken theory of consciousness, and that's where he's going wrong at the moment.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, you're talking a lot about the consciousness of the device or the robot, but it seems like when we talk about morals and ethics, how people use the robots is going to be or don't use them, I suppose, would be something that would be telling as well. I mean, is that something that you...
Yeah, I mean, there's the guests that come and one chooses the white hat, one chooses the black hat, right? And this already signals that one has a different kind of moral consciousness about the acts towards these robots. And one thing is to sort of categorize the robots, but you can also think about what are the acts that you're committing with respect to them, and violence. There's a lot of violence in the show, and that's casual violence in this way that's actually very disturbing, even though we know it's a representation because it's a movie. Like that violence affects us, and I think there's a lot of commentary kind of underlying that about like video games like Grand Theft Auto or something like that, where you just kind of go around wreaking havoc, shooting whoever you want, carjacking whoever you want. And somehow it's like, it's a little bit weird at a video game, but it's way more creepy and visceral when it suddenly becomes robotic systems, and you're really doing physical violence to them, whether they're conscious of it, whether they feel pain, and they're programmed to behave as if they feel pain and to avoid it and to be afraid and to suffer. And I think it also ties into some of these questions of consciousness when there's a lot about memory in the show, because every time they die, you know, like a video game character, they spawn again without any memory of what happened before. And that's sort of supposed to be, oh, well, they felt the pain, but they don't remember having felt the pain, so it's okay. But then as these memories start creeping back up, I think that's a crucial part of what identity is for humans. And it becomes part of what makes these individuals with identity, that they aren't just a storyline, they have a memory of what's happened before and a future potentially.
Right. I want to get back into just what you were saying about Grand Theft Auto. That being, you know, you're playing a video game, you see it on a screen, it's not happening around you. And the difference between that and, say, like if Westworld was a virtual reality thing, if like people plugged into it and did whatever they wanted, is there a different set of moral standards, and is there different responsibility on the guest there than, say, if you're in a place where you're occupying physical space, even though these are androids or not humans? Like, is there a difference between that type of world and one that's maybe virtual?
I think there is. So, you know, take Grand Theft Auto. So you're just, so this goes back to this distinction between persons and things. So if you think that, you know, if you're just dealing with these sprites or these graphics or, you know, and then you do violent things to it, right? It's kind of like me sort of just kicking the garbage can really violently.
I will admit to playing World of Warcraft just so that I can get some trolls or whatever.
And so what we think when people do that is we think at worst it sort of reflects badly on their character. It's like you're not doing any damage to the thing itself, because the thing itself doesn't have, you know, any kind of moral status, like kicking a rock or, you know, whatever. But what's really interesting in the Westworld is that it's more than that. It's not just like kicking a rock, it's more like kicking your dog, right? I mean, if the robot's there, maybe they're not quite persons, but if they're starting to have attributes that are personhood-like, then it's kind of like slicing up your cat or kicking your dog, etc., etc. And that part is really interesting. Now, to answer your question about the virtual reality, that adds a further dimension, because the virtual reality is kind of like a person's extended agency. So, if we're both in a sort of, in a virtual reality, and I rob you, I take your, sort of something from you, I would be injuring you indirectly, right? And so there's sort of, it's mediated agency. But what's different about Westworld is that it's not mediated. It's us versus the robots themselves, and where we are, and what's interesting is that it looks like they have more moral status than things, and so it doesn't just reflect badly on our character. We think we're actually doing real damage. They're real exploitation of these robots, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
And that's interesting because one of the big discussions that's coming out of this show is really what it says about our behavior, about what humans do. Because a lot of these guests, they're going there to live out fantasies about killing people or, really carnal fantasies.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was watching with my sister, we were like, well, why doesn't anyone just go just to like dress up and play in this world? You don't have people that are just kind of like exploring what a frontier world would be like. So as, coming from a philosophy background for both of you, like what does that really say about human nature?
Well, I mean, you can look at all kinds of games and play acting and things like that. There's a certain sense of the realism that they're going for that I think is attracting certain customers, and specifically people who are intrigued with the Wild West as this kind of place without laws, or place where force of violence is sort of the rule of law in many ways. So I think there's a seductiveness to that, and the kinds of people then who are going to go and play those kinds of games, just like, not to say that violent people are going to play, a violent video game, but people who want to sort of explore those aggressions. And there's something about knowing that it's not real that also makes it acceptable. And I think part of, why these two different guests act very differently is that one has a lot of trouble kind of just letting go of these social norms that are very strongly indoctrinated, or to even believe that they don't apply, and maybe violates them even though he thinks they still do apply. So I think, you're going to get people who want to do dark things in these kinds of spaces because it's acceptable, but then they also seem to want this realism. And that seems to be the tension, that they don't just want a dumb robot, right? Or like a simple video game thing. They want something that's very sophisticated, and the more real, the better. And so there's that sort of stimulation that comes from real fear and real killing and real sex that seems more intense. And so they kind of keep pushing those boundaries, which is interesting.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting that they're not telling the guests what they're getting into. So, when Williams get on the train, everybody sort of asks, well, are you real? That's sort of the basic question. But they don't know how real they are. They're sort of different degrees. And, you might think that, if you're playing a real game, there'll be sort of the agreement where, where you have to sign, and it tells you exactly what you're getting into. But you're not getting that. And so you might think there's some basic problems with the way the company is set up. There's some sort of ethical informed consent. The business model is kind of weird, right? It's only after you've been in there and you played a few times, and then the other thing is that but there could be sort of mistaken beliefs. Just the company itself is under a mistaken impression. Maybe they're not realizing how much the technology has outpaced. Maybe initially it started out with these robots being not just like sort of Grand Theft Auto, but it's gotten to a point where it's changed, but it's very subtle and they don't realize it, and they're making a real fundamental mistake, and that's really interesting.
That is,
Now, is that, I've seen that, like a version of that from folks like Elon Musk or Stephen Hawking, who say we have to pay attention now to things that could come later because we're making everything smarter. There was a hacking just like last week or whatever, where they get into just your household things that are smart to a point because they're connected to each other. They can talk to each other. And I mean, is that a discussion? I mean, I'm unclear kind of where we are now. If we should,
when is the right time to have a discussion about that? Or is it past? Are we too late? Or is it when we've hit like a certain milestone in technology or something?
Is there a tipping point, like where we know how smart things are, that how we should treat them, that it becomes do unto other rather than this is my servant?
Yeah, well, I think it comes to some of these questions that are, there's smartness or intelligence of sort of being able to understand what's happening in the world, but there's these deeper questions of understanding yourself as an identity and a consciousness and making rules for yourself to follow, right? Which is where you start to see the robots, like, they don't just follow a program and a script, but are actually generating not just new scripts based, and we see it even in the film, like they generate a new script and it's like, where did you come up with that? I took this passage about love and I applied it to this thing, right?
That's right.
So that's a sort of inkling of it, but then really when, she picks up the gun and like, I'm going to be a different being in the world.
We audibly gasped when we saw that happen.
Yes.
My wife and I.
And I think that's that spark of sort of original being and thought, right? That philosophers would think that's an autonomous agent, right? Not just something that's being directed. And I think that's something that you can sort of identify as a physical phenomenon to some extent, but it's a lot of kind of inner consciousness that's playing out in there. And to say that objects are going to have that kind of capability anytime soon in real world, no. I think we don't really understand it is part of the problem. If we really knew exactly what it was, we could probably replicate it much more quickly. But we're still trying to figure out exactly what it is. And I think something like consciousness is mostly proprioception. And I would grant that most animals have that, right? Frogs, fish, birds, mammals, like they know where they are in the world. They know the position of their body. They feel pain. They feel experience. They understand themselves as a living being when they're hungry and they want warmth and things like that. Whether they reach that higher level where they see themselves as part of a social system with a certain particular standing, where they develop complex models of other people and their minds and their intentions and their needs and desires, that's much more complicated. And then having, even for these individuals, and that's where I think memory and identity become very complicated in the narrative arc, is you can actually become alienated from your own experience and identity in a lot of complicated ways that we see in brain disorders. The writer of the show also worked on Memento, which has this kind of strange timeline where he keeps forgetting everything and leaving notes for himself, and so that way in which even memory kind of feeds into your understanding of who you are and where you are at a particular place and time is kind of crucial to a lot of how we understand ourselves.
Yeah, so I agree with Dr. Asaro that we're still kind of far away. Like I don't think we have to worry about the robots that we have right now. But it's good to have this conversation now, because I think that when we transition over, it's going to kind of be like Westworld, where we don't really know. And so there's going to be this sort of vagueness, this sort of area where all of a sudden it switches over and we didn't even realize it. And that could have enormous consequences, because now we're treating, entities that aren't things. We're treating them wrongly. We're not treating them appropriate to the kind of thing that they are. And that's what the show is trying to show, that, we're past that point, but the people in it don't realize that there's this subtle change, right? They're not aware. They don't realize, who they're dealing with, so to speak.
And you might even argue that they're making the claim that the violence that these humans are exacting on the robots is still bad, even if the robots aren't the kinds of things that are due a certain level of morality or respect. But just enacting, which is why we don't want people torturing animals. It's bad in itself. It's also bad for society in general. And that could be a very unacceptable moral behavior.
Do humans have a moral responsibility towards machines that they create? Like if something goes wrong, like even not to the extent of what Westworld is, but just something, a machine does harm, who's responsible for that? Or do we have a responsibility?
So I think we do. I mean, just sort of, so there are sort of different degrees of things that we create, from cars to robots to, even sort of, breeding dogs and cats, count as creating in some sense to having children, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of, you have a spectrum, right? And so we have some, in terms of, with respect to things like cars, we have complete, responsibility. It's kind of our car, right? So if it hits somebody, it's kind of our, usually we're driving it, so it's our responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. And then to say if we, if we're dog owners and our dog bites somebody, right, that's our responsibility too, to some, even though the dog has a bit of agency, but not that much, right? So, we think that I was responsible for leash, keeping the dog on a leash, et cetera, right? And so the robot is kind of in that space, right, between where we have full responsibility. And then even if it's not fully a person, it's gotta, it could be like creating a dog where we also have some responsibility towards it. And so that means, what does that mean? That means that, well, with respect to a dog, for example, I'm responsible for taking the dog for a walk, making sure that, it's, it doesn't just suffer in pain, right? Take it to the vet when it's, hurt, et cetera, et cetera. You might think that I have similar responsibilities towards the robot, right? That I shouldn't cause it unnecessary pains, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. One thing that we write about on Live Science a lot is sort of the ethics surrounding, well, one example is self-driving cars.
Yeah.
So being able to be comfortable with the fact that maybe a car would make a moral calculation. Say an accident is about to happen, there are 4 people in the car versus 2 people on the sidewalk. Where is that line drawn then? Because it gets really murky when you start thinking about then having machines that can make these types of calculations.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's really a question of how much autonomy do we want to give the machine, and if we're giving it this kind of power to make decisions, what choices are we building into it, and what are the consequences of those choices, and who should get to decide what those choices are? If that kind of decision has to be programmed into the car, does the manufacturer decide that? What kind of input is there? What's sort of the public opinion about all of this, and what role should that have in shaping that? I think that's all crucial. But I think it's more important sort of in the bigger picture to think, well, how much autonomy do we actually want to give over to these machines, and how much do we want them to be responsible for these things, and how much responsibility do we take sort of building certain technologies into it so that it doesn't do the things we don't want it to do, and make sure that they're safe and so forth.
Yeah.
I had a question I think maybe that might lead from that. I mean, Dr. Liao, you have a child, right? I have a 7-year-old daughter. Some folks might have seen her already. And I know that like for on the space side, NASA is looking at how to have robots and people work together for some other goal. We don't see a lot of that in Westworld. It's like a Disneyland for adults. But that's something that I could see in the future. My daughter might have a robot pet or a robot friend or something, and then there's another type of responsibility on how, as parents, we have to teach kids now that robots are one thing, but they are not junk or a toy or something like that. And how do you see that evolving? I mean, it's been about 20, 30 years since the original Westworld. In 20, 30 years, it could look our relationship with technology could be completely different. And I'm just wondering how you might see that playing out in real time. What that discussion is going to be like.
Yeah, so I think that there are already robot carers, sort of these robots that sort of in old age homes, they sort of, they put the, sort of the robots talking to the elderly. And there are also some sort of robots for kids where they sort of smile a lot and they do various things. And kids they're finding that both the elderly and the children are getting attached to these robots. So some of them will treat the robots badly, but others are getting attached. And so there's sort of this complex. So there's sort of 2 different issues. One is when they treat them badly, what you should tell them. You should tell them to be nicer, right? But also when they get too attached, what do you tell them? And so some people are saying that, maybe you shouldn't create robots that look too much like humans, because in case they have, sort of misidentification or sort of misalignment of attachment or something like that. But other people are saying that might be a good thing, right? So a couple of years ago, there was this sort of, like Tamagotchi, sort of where you get like kids to take care, or like even, I think when I was a kid, they used to give you like an egg and you have to carry it around, to like sort of make sure that it's okay, And so this type of empathetic emotion is something that we try to teach our children. And so on the whole, I think it's a good thing. And the whole point of empathy, I guess, is that you want to make sure that it's targeted correctly, right? So you want to be have appropriate empathy for the right kinds of things. So that's sort of, and that's an important lesson to learn in life. You need to know when to direct that and when not to direct it, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we have these sort of special objects anyway, right? So if the kid smashes your iPhone, you're going to be really upset at them, right? And they need to know that. But there's also like they are really fixated with these devices and like they'll do all these fascinating things. So I think robots will be like that.
Yeah.
It's where you start displacing these anthropomorphic feelings about having emotions or expecting it to behave in ways that humans behave.
Yeah.
where that they may not actually be able to fulfill that, and that could be, I think, difficult for kids who are learning to socialize if they're spending lots of time with robot friends or teachers or things. In the way that if they spend way too much time on video games, right, they don't have the social skills they need to be successful. And kids can be terrible, right? And they're going to test the boundaries of things. And they did some nice studies in Japan of these robots in the museums, and kids will kind of gang up and kick them and beat them and see what they can get away with. And the defense strategy for the robot, which I really liked, is to try to find tall people, so then which are adults, and then they impose the social norms on the kids, and they stop beating on the robots. So rather than actually have the robot sort of defend itself, it just like finds an authority.
We had a question actually from one of our viewers. Is the show a good representation for how AI should be addressed in the future, that we should respect the entity or just use it?
I think that's, we're going that way where, so right now we can distinguish between sort of AI now and sort of AI in the future. And I think AI in the future, is the line, it's going to start to blur, whether they acquire agency, consciousness, capacity to feel pain and pleasure, et cetera, et cetera. And as that line blurs, I think the show, what I really like about the show is that it's telling us that we need to change our attitudes towards these things. Like we need to be much more reflective. We're not just along with power comes responsibility. Once you're creating these things, they might have certain rights, and then we need to, if so, we need to respect them. And this, the show is kind of pushing that. And so that's a great question. So.
Another thing that sort of got me thinking with the show is what we really want to be using AI for in the future. Do we know yet? Because there are so many, like right now it seems like it's just kind of endless possibilities, and it's kind of hard to really pin down what would be a good use versus a bad use. And actually, whether people know it or not, AI probably plays a part in a lot of our lives, whether we know it or not. There's a lot of these big companies are investing in AI companies. And then the second part of my question is then, do we limit it? Or do we know how to limit it so that it's not used for nefarious purposes?
Well, I think a lot of what AI is just statistical machine learning, rule following, none of which is particularly special or human or conscious.
Right.
And I think there's this, we want to keep projecting a lot of anthropomorphic and humanistic ideas onto it and think, well, if it's an AI, then it's this mind and it's like a human mind. So I think for most things, basically you're just running statistics in a giant database, and it's boring.
Sexy,
It's really boring if you're conscious. So I hope they're not conscious. Otherwise, that's really evil. But I think it's this urge, and I think the show makes it clear to like make them like us, to try to recreate human life, human beings. Which is a sort of godlike power, and then to also feel like, okay, we can enslave them or lord over them or do violence to them because they're inferior. And I think that's a problematic morality to sort of hold towards any kind of being, if whether it's worthy or deserving of certain rights and respect. I think that's going to be a kind of case-by-case basis. Let's see how the technology unfolds. But certainly, as they become more sophisticated, we're going to have to think about that. I think the real problem is identity, because when you have an AI, like what is the AI? I mean, if it's a program and you can make 1 million copies of it, you can delete 1 million copies. If you delete all but one, if you delete the final one, is that death? Is that if we have multiple copies of the same robot and one makes a mistake, should you punish them all or just one? And these boundaries of like what is the sort of extent, and humans are sort of nicely packaged, right? We know you're a human, you don't extend sort of beyond that, but in another sense we're not, right? So we're also parts of social organizations, and that's where a lot of our norms come from. And so when you kill somebody, it's not just a harm to that individual, right? You hurt their family, you hurt their friends, you hurt their community. And I think we have to start thinking about rights and those sorts of wider views of like, what does that mean socially, not just this is an individual who deserves a right.
Well, I guess one of the questions that I've been thinking about it for, I think, a little bit during this conversation is laws of robotics, right? We've heard, if you're a science fiction fan, there are 3 or maybe more from Isaac Asimov and
Which we've
beyond.
already, in Westworld, we've already passed that because she kills the fly on her neck.
That's right!
Yes,
Oh!
right.
So she's already hurt, a living thing.
Another gasp.
Maybe it's a robot fly.
Yeah, that's right.
That's true. Okay.
Yeah.
But do you envision then with this need for a morality on the human user side, a laws of robotics using or a user's guide, or that people will have to eventually agree before you take in some sort of robot in your household, or agree that you're going to step into a robotic car or something like that? Is that a hurdle that society is going to have to face as the technology increases?
I think more and more. I mean, there's already the Pepper robot that you have to sign an agreement in Japan that you're not going to have sex with it. Not why you would necessarily want to, but so I think having these kinds of restrictions, and again, it's probably more for the overall social benefit than for the benefit of that particular robot, and it's like animals. So in a sense, the animal, doesn't have standing in court. It's not going to vote, but at the same time, it's pretty terrible just to go and slaughter them without any purpose, or to do so out of anger and aggression and just violence.
Yeah. So I think Dr. Asaro is right that in the near term, the AIs are not that sophisticated. They're machine learning. They're just they're taking a lot of big data and they're running sort of different kinds of analysis on them. So that's what we have. But now people are sort of looking at the emotional components, for example, and they're trying to learn that aspect, and then they're trying to look at the perceptual aspect. And once you put all those together, as they get more complex, now I do think that the line will start to blur, and then the question is whether they'll blur enough such that these AI in the future become person-like, right? So that could they're not certainly not right now, but in the future that could be a question. And as we progress, as the AIs get more and more complex, our attitude towards it needs to change, right? Because as they get more sophisticated, they have different moral standing. And so I like your idea of that, we should have rules, like different rules. And the thing is, we need to be clear about what we're creating. And so sometimes maybe the engineers aren't realizing. They create it first and they say, oh no, what did I just create, right? So kind of like the Frankenstein, right? Yeah. And so it'd be helpful to have that discussion in advance to sort of say, we might be creating this, so let's be careful. And so what do we do in a case where we're unclear about the moral status of the thing, what the thing can do? Like, what should we do? We should have a discussion about uncertainty, sort of morality under uncertainty. And so including uncertainty of moral status, right? So some people talk about that with respect to animals, like higher animals. So you think there are debates about octopus and chimpanzees, sort of uncertain moral status. Maybe we should give them the benefit of the doubt and treat them as if they have that kind of moral status, right? They're sort of different debates, but that's sort of a model where we can approach in cases of uncertainty where they're sort of embodied in this gray zone where we're not quite sure where they are, right? And so that would be a helpful conversation to have, I think.
Certainly on the show, they don't seem to have a lot of regulation about this, because they seem to be able to go in and switch the software, push out updates as they see fit.
Yeah. And the other way would be to look at it from a design perspective and to say, okay, if you're creating a robot that's an appliance that serves a single function, you make it look like a garbage can or a vacuum cleaner or a car. And it's like, okay, you know what a car is supposed to do, you get into it and that's it. You don't expect it to, bake a cake, right? But when you have a humanoid, then you have these much higher sets of expectations, which are just kind of built in through socialization and a natural sense of what it is to be a human. And that's where it starts triggering all of these emotions. And that's, I think, what you want is an alignment. So you don't want a system that looks very human, but is not actually sort of there. But then if it does look human and it has something like consciousness, then you would have to respect it. And that would signal that. But if it looks like a garbage can and it has consciousness, then again, it's like a disconnect. Like you'd think it looks like a garbage can, but how am I supposed
it's
to know
like a double standard.
Like those poor robots on the Death Star, right? They're just walking around. It's just a garbage can or whatever.
Well, and that's something they do address, because I think it's the head of it's the person who's like trying to create new narrative storylines.
Oh, okay.
He was saying, is it Lee? Okay. Yeah. He was saying that Ford, who's the Anthony Hopkins character, like they keep trying to make them look more lifelike or more human, but the people come here because they don't want to know that these guys are human as well. Like it's something that they do address a little bit on the show, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it touches on a little bit of that double standard, actually, because you're right. Like I would think of a humanoid robot differently than a Roomba, let's say.
Right.
So we have a little bit of time left, and I wanted to get into, I know this was more like delving into the science of it, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the show because we are in the middle of the season. So are there things that you're looking forward to for, the second half of the season, storylines, characters that you're intrigued by?
Dr. Asaro, you teach the original Westworld in your class, so I think you can let us know what haven't you seen yet that you're hoping for.
Right. Well, so I think what's interesting is what's changed. So the one thing is that there don't seem to be all electronics inside, right? It's gotten much more human-like in terms of how they build the systems. And then I think in terms of who the bad guys are or what the sort of big mystery is, because it was some kind of virus or infection, like a computer virus that spreads in the original.
Yeah.
And this doesn't seem to be that, right? And they've had these anomalies, but it seems much more that it's like this memory and consciousness and things that are starting to kick in as they increase their realism. But then, of course, there's a lot of other subplots. So you don't know necessarily where all of that's going to go and how that could turn out. So I think there's a lot to be learned still.
Yeah. I thought that there was I thought that the virus was spread through words, sort of this violent delights.
Well, that's
and there's the whispered in the air.
Because Dolores seems to pass it on to Maeve, and Maeve is actually a really interesting character, I find, because now she seems to be experiencing these self-aware thoughts and having the flashbacks.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to. So we're starting to see that Dolores is acquiring some sort of self-consciousness. She's starting to be aware of her actions, and sort of like self-directing in the sense that Dr. Asaro was talking about. I like to see whether they move towards full-on moral agency. So right now, it's a lot of it. Right now, it's still self-preservation. It's about her. Right. She's trying to, how can I get out of this world? And William is kind of an instrument. Right, she's really treating William as a means to her end. I need to be with you so that I can get out of this where I can find the maze, etc.
That's the guest that she's with.
That's the guest that she's with. That's right. So that, you might think it's a prototypical rational agency, and it gives you some sort of moral standing, but not full-on moral standing, not full-on moral agency, not full-on moral status yet, just like the way persons have. So when she starts to have regards, like direct regards for say a guest's own sake or something, then that's what we talk about in sort of moral philosophy. We talk about sort of treating people as an end in themselves, right? And so she hasn't exhibited that yet. I'm kind of looking for that, and I'm sort of excited to see, because if that shifts, if she has that, then you might think, some people think that's a criterion for personhood. And that's when she's really a person, right? If she can understand what she's doing and treat someone as a, sort of sacrificing her goal of getting into the, so one way to test that would be, she can get to the maze, but she would have to sacrifice William. And she decides not to go in order to save William or something like that. That would really show it. So that'd be really interesting. So,
Tariq, what about you? Do you watch this in the fetal position?
I do have a love-fear relationship with robots. I have, from a news standpoint, one of the big things that I really love as I started in newspapers. So there was the muckraking reporters that think that there's something going on with the company at Dallas, right? And that was like a big driver. I want to root for these reporters, and I haven't seen that yet. So I'm very interested in how the outside world is perceiving Westworld and what it does, because we know that there's an outside world in that. Apparently, from what we've seen from the show so far, people have said that it's like a paradise, or everyone's needs are taken care of. It sounds like there isn't as many of the social problems that we have now, and that's why people go to this giant theme park so that they can kind of experience something. And so I'm interested to find out what's happening. I haven't seen one guest take a selfie with a robot. Is that verboten? We do know that they have to.
That's right. They have to give up everything.
They have to give up. They have to get dressed and wear everything. Period. But then we have seen a family with their kids there. What are they doing? We haven't seen that part of things yet. And then we know that people do bring some stuff in and then leave it, and it causes problems with the robot. Dolores's robot dad gets replaced because he finds a picture of someone in Times Square and can't really deal with that. They can't handle it, as opposed to being programmed maybe to, there's a piece of paper, I don't understand it, so I'm going to throw it away. They don't do that, and so what's going on there. So there's a lot of questions on how everything is perceived
Yeah, I'm
inside
also
the
really
park.
curious what their liability statement is for the guests coming in, what they sign away, because it seems like, oh, it's really safe. You can only shoot like the robots, and you get shot, you get hurt. But then it's also like it's getting more and more violent, and they can beat you up, and they can. And there's all kinds of other ways to die, like falling off things, drowning, horses, which I suppose are also robotic, but you can really get hurt. Like, how do they control that? And does that, as you get further out into these more dangerous worlds, can the guests die?
Right.
That's a big question. You know, from kind of like the high end, it sounds like this is a park for very well off, very rich individuals. And you know, from on the space side of things, we have people like Richard Branson who they're building thrill rides to launch people into space, and they're going to go through at least a limited form of training. They're going to sign a waiver that says, I know I'm going to get on a rocket ship, I'm going to go off, you know, and so if anything happens, you know, so be it. I'm doing that, and we haven't seen someone on even like a device or an iPad say, okay, I get it, you know, let's go to the Wild West, you know?
Do we think that there are different timelines going on? Because that's been a theory that's been proposed about Ford and Bernard being on sort of an Arnold to a degree, being on a different timeline than say William and I can't remember his friend's name, but the other guy that he comes in with.
So one of the theories is that, and this is spoiler alert, is that
we said that at the beginning. If you're still here,
mad at us now.
So that William is the man in black, right? And that's a huge
But he's wearing the
theory.
white hat, though. That can't be it.
So at some point, so the story is that he might switch. That William was and Dolores. That story is actually taking place in the past, right?
Okay.
And that the man in black is sort of the. So you know, William says to the man in black says to Dolores, "Oh, we know each other for 30 years, right?" And so that was 30 years ago when Dolores was trying to break out, you know, and so that's sort of one possibility. There's something, I'm not sure about that theory because you'll remember that Dolores ran away as a result of someone attacking the house, right? And so that and that's
stumbled on their camp.
That's right, And so I'm not sure if that makes sense, but but anyways, so that's at least one story that's been discussed.
Well, I think it's a masterpiece of nonlinear narrative, really. And if you look at the original Westworld, there's not any of that nonlinearity. And what's really changed, I think, in the intervening years is video games. And now there's actually the audience who understands, oh, you have these sprites and like they're just going to try to lure you into a story and they'll just keep going on these loops. And so we see the robots sort of following the same kind of narrative structure. But then that starts to get more complicated when you start to say, well, what if they can now start to remember these things and they start sort of having different timelines. And each of these individuals, I think, is having a different kind of psychological timeline of their experience of that world. And those are starting to break down as they become more conscious of their own memories and of past events and flashbacks. And I mean, so Nolan, who's one of the writers and creators, also wrote Memento, which has this whole time back and forth thing. And you see this a little bit in some of the other video game type movies. So there's The Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise, where you know you're going to reboot, and so you can sort of try the same thing in like Groundhog Day over and over again until you succeed. Or Existence, which is the Cronenberg video game VR kind of movie. So there's a lot of references to both of those films kind of running throughout the series, and a lot of kind of, it's a very literate in terms of its media background.
And Arnold, of course, we haven't encountered him. He's been this shadowy figure that we've heard about, but of course not seen. And allegedly he died in the park. We were having a discussion right before this started about whether he's actually dead or, you know, what the circumstances surrounding his death. Like I think they alluded to it, and I'm not sure if I'm making this up or not, but I think they alluded to the fact that it was likely a suicide. But then I have this theory that maybe he was killed by a host, and maybe he's not dead after all.
I think he's Anthony Hopkins. I've already said that.
I think he's uploaded to a robot.
I think Bernard is a robot. And this is not my theory, I'm not taking credit for this, but somebody was saying that in every scene he has his glasses on the bridge of his, or on his nose, like lower down. And so like if he was a robot, he wouldn't need glasses. And then if he needs glasses, why are they always so low down? So people had actually like gone back and looked at all this stuff. And I'm you know, that could be it, you know. Like,
you know, one thing I want to see is someone making it, like giving like another company a tour of their factory. Because, I don't know if you noticed, but their entire factory is completely see-through. Right, so that everyone can see what everyone else is doing.
But they're like in a rock face, though. Like they're
But it makes me think that they don't trust even the employees to be okay with the robots, and that's why there's you can see what everyone is doing. So,
but they get into a lot of mischief though. These
do.
employees, it seems like they clamp down hard on them, but yet they're people doing God knows what to all these hosts. And I thought those scenes were like fantastic. Like any scene in the lab is amazing. I thought like how they showed that.
Yeah. It's really interesting, what you just said about being able to see through. So there's this whole idea about privacy and the importance of privacy. And so one of my colleagues, David Velleman, talks about how privacy is, sort of the ability to self-represent, to decide what you want to represent to the outside world and to hide certain aspects. So you might think of Adam and Eve. Right, Eve at some point was able to hide. It's when they lost this ability, when they realized that they couldn't represent themselves in a certain way, that they start to feel shame, right? And so what we're seeing in Dolores is that she's now able to hide certain thoughts, right, in her head, so in the latest episode, she was able to say, "Oh, I didn't tell Ford anything," he doesn't know, or something like that. And the transparency of the glass is really interesting because that's where you cannot hide. But if you look at that engineer, this guy was hiding the bird in a little cupboard. So this whole idea of hiding is really interesting. Being able to hide things and represent, be able to just represent what you want other people to see. Some people think that's a prototypical ability to be an agent, right?
Right.
Yeah, and so that's going to be I think that's a really interesting thing. So.
Did you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, well, just thinking about hiding things, because it's actually, things get hidden in their bodies.
Yes.
Right? So there's the bullet in the stomach that reveals the truth that actually these things are happening over and over again. And then the transmitter, which that's going to be a really interesting storyline. So that this is a closed world. And somehow now information is being transmitted out, and by who and for what.
Yeah.
That's the laser transmitter that we saw in the arm.
That's right.
In case folks are still here and they haven't seen it, but you're okay knowing what's going on. So, lots of questions.
I know, so much to think about. I love that.
For the show and for reality, I think.
Yeah. Hopefully we've touched on, or hopefully we've come. Basically, the takeaway is be nice to robots, is what I'm hearing. Just in case.
Because eventually they'll be smarter than they are now.
Yeah.
So.
Dr. Liao, Dr. Asaro, I want to thank you guys for coming and joining us. Tariq, of course, thank you.
I do like robots. I'm sold. Thank you very much.
And thank you for tuning in. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and if you want to grab the latest headlines from what we're doing, subscribe to our newsletter, nspace.com as well. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.